There are various reports of 250,000 dead Russians, 100,000 Ukrainians have died over the course of the war. These are the figures which are being reported at the moment. The other stories which are coming out are the stories about whether or not it's possible for Ukraine to negotiate over Crimea. Russia or Putin has decided that that's not on the cards. Why? Well, already we can see evidence from the air of Putin's forces planting mines around their positions. Well, that suggests, number one, that they're not proposing to start an offensive from that area, and number two, that they're digging in a very aggressive way, in a very determined way, and it will be incredibly difficult to capture the position. But should Ukraine want to? If you go back to a 1991 consensus or a 1991 poll, a referendum that was held towards the end of the Soviet Republic, at the point when Russia was emerging from the USSR, there was a question about whether or not Crimea or Ukraine wanted independence from the USSR. What's interesting is Kyiv voted 92% for independence. Crimea voted 54% for independence. Sevastopol, 57%. So the desire for independence from Russia, from the USSR in Crimea, was of course quite low because there was a high population of Russians living there. And since the annexation of Crimea by Mr. Putin a few years ago, there's been more Russians moving in. And so Crimea is now a predominantly Russian population being fed on predominantly Russian propaganda. I don't think it would welcome being taken in as part of Crimea, as part of Ukraine anymore. The same could be said for the Russian Donbass, not the areas of Donetsk and Luhansk that have been were formerly part of Ukraine and that have been partly conquered by Russia, but the original area which was invaded by Russian troops and particularly by the Wagner mercenaries. That again would be very difficult to take back as Ukrainian territory. So talks about getting back Crimea, I suggest, are dangerous. Thousands are dying every day in the area around Mariupol, in the area around Donetsk, for a cause that is hopeless. For a cause that is hopeless, and the front line has not shifted in 6 months. As I say, Russians are now mining the territory in Crimea. It suggests not only that there's not going to be an offensive, that they're in a poor position. And certainly looking at the videos on Telegram, they seem genuinely scared. They're digging trenches. There's heavy preparation. There's a lot of very interesting things that are popping up on the Telegram channel, and I'll try and keep you as informed as I can. I'm afraid my understanding of Ukrainian is very limited, but so many of these people on both sides of the conflict are speaking Russian, and it makes for very sad reading. One of the advantages of the Telegram feed is that it's largely uncensored, and so you see a lot of stuff which you don't see in the news reports. A lot of it is deeply disturbing, but you also see a lot of stuff which has been eradicated and suppressed by the propaganda efforts on both sides. What I find so disturbing on my channel, and what I think I'm going to make some efforts to try and counter, are the silly slogans about death to Ukrainians and victory for Russia, and the stupidity. Of course, I want people to debate the issues, but I think I'm going to ramp up a little bit more suppression of these slogans and these silly slogans. So you are given fair warning. I will leave it a few days before I do it, but I would just simply remove them. I don't think the sloganizing is useful, and this messing around pretending to be trolls. There are trolls on here, and some of the people who are pretending to be trolls and pretending to identify trolls are simply wasting time. And I would much rather there was real engagement than that this becomes a playground. We're dealing with serious issues and with people's lives here, and I think we should have some respect for that. We should have respect not only for the peoples of Ukraine and for the various people who are helping them, but I think we should also have respect for the Russians, even those who have joined the Wagner Brigade, because why people get involved in these things, heaven knows. I'm sure they come to regret it. But I think there's always a story, and a heartfelt story, when it comes to people who die in conflict. They all have mothers, and there is always sadness, and I think we should respect that fact. There's a lot of videos that I've seen today, particularly, of Russians walking past trucks. There's one particular truck, an American personnel carrier, an M113, which had blown up before the photographers got there. And as they walked round, they were being unbelievably abusive about the dead soldiers who were lying around the vehicle, the Ukrainians who were lying around the vehicle. And what was particularly distressing, and what is always distressing to see, is the fact that they were asking, are these Dills? No, they're Polish. No, they're not. Oh, somebody's already been here. They've already been decapitated and their hands have been cut off. And the thought which goes through my mind is, what have they done with these limbs and these heads? Well, they've taken them with them. This is the stuff of diabolism. This is diabolical. This is horrendous. And this is part of the raison d'etre of this savage war, and particularly of the Wagner Brigade running around the place with hammers, with mallets, smashing people's knees when they don't, when they're not as aggressive as they want them to be. At the moment in Bakhmut, there's an effort by the Wagner Brigade to cut off the supply lines to Bakhmut. And there's been an attempt to lay siege to a little village called Ivanovskavo. But the report suggests that although there's been this attempt to lay siege to this little village, it doesn't say that it's successful. So reading between the lines, there's an attempt to move forward by a few feet, and that's been a failure. And it's reading between the lines which is the key to looking at what's going on. there's a Ukrainian fellow who does a very good job putting forward a summary every day. Danilov, is it Danilov? I'll come to him tomorrow, I think, because there's a very interesting story, and sometimes he makes statements which I think are not necessarily justified. There's a group of vehicles on a road, and he says this is a Ukrainian convoy which has been stopped. Well, there isn't evidence for that, and if it were a Ukrainian convoy, the Russian tag to that video would be significantly more celebratory. I think this is the Russian tag simply says this is the road into Bakhmut. This is what the road looks like now, and the claims would be more triumphal if the Russians had destroyed an entire convoy. I think this is a collection of cars, a tank that have accumulated over the days. And I think it's very important not to draw conclusions if the evidence is not clear. There's no proof that this is the convoy. This is important on both sides, because if you make too many false claims, then it cheapens the debate. There are hundreds of false claims like this being made across Russian media, day after day after sniveling day, and it of course means that you can't believe what is being put out on the Russian news channels, on mainstream media, Russian mainstream media. I think the Telegram sources are significantly more reliable. And as for the sources on YouTube, I think one has to look at them very carefully, and one has to question the bias and the source material. Certainly Ukraine is much readier with this information because so much of the Russian propaganda and information is going out to the Russian domestic audience. Anyway, have a good night.